My name is Alexander Abel, and my project is titled Adolescents' Perspective of Gender in Leadership. So why should we care? Last May, I attended the National Conference for College Women Student Leaders in Washington, D.C. And while I was there, I learned about vast inequalities between men and women in the workplace, including disparity in pay among men and women in the same job position, known as the gender wage gap, and the inability of women to be promoted to managerial positions called the glass ceiling. In addition, there's still occupational segregation, which seeks to put men and women in appropriate jobs based on stereotypes about their gender. Although the focus of this conference was what can be done to improve this situation, there was also a lot of focus on what is currently progressing and some hope for the future about equality, not only in the workplace, but in other aspects of society. Some of the theories that I encountered while doing my research are these four main concepts, which provide a sort of, for lack of a better word, justification for the lack of gender equality in upper-level management positions. And these are positions of power where the person has powers of delegation and project management and facilitation, the role congruity theory of prejudice, which argues that the standing female stereotype and the current definition of leadership roles are not in agreement with one another. So this means that masculine characteristics and behaviors are more suited to leadership roles than feminine characteristics and behaviors. Many researchers also argue that it is a fundamental biological difference between men and women that make women incapable of occupying these roles. Despite this, there are changing leadership styles within the workplace. Transformational leadership style has often been associated with women in the workplace because it seeks to encourage, empower, and motivate. Androgynous type leaders embody both feminine and masculine qualities in the workplace, and the strategy of the web positions leaders centrally in a team rather than singularly at the top, which promotes collaboration. With all of these changes occurring, opinions about gender and leadership have largely remained the same. Women are more likely to judge managers based on their competency, while men continue to take into consideration the manager's gender when forming a position. So, why this? Little research has been conducted to measure attitudes of an upcoming generation of men and women, which is why I chose to focus on adolescents. This has the possibility for implications of leadership style versus gender or vice versa, and can impact future equality in the workplace. So I had three main research questions. How do the participants describe men and women? Are men or women rated higher on a manager perception scale? And how do the participants feel about him or her? And I hypothesized that it is expected that men will be seen more favorably than women in the workplace despite differences in managerial style. So, I had 65 total participants, 38 were female, and 27 were male. They range between 15 and 17 years old. And as you can see here, a majority of my participants were white. The next down identified themselves as more than one race or biracial, and then Asian. And they were recruited from 3 high school history classes at a local public high school. Okay, so my materials. I had 4 levels of my independent variable. I made them male and friendly, female and friendly, and in this scenario, the manager was kind, engaged in casual conversation, and then presented the reader with an important project and offered his or her support. The next 2 were male and firm and female and firm, where the manager maintained a strictly professional relationship and then presented a project and offered no support. So each one of my participants received only one of these scenarios. And my survey had 3 different parts. The first was an adjective list adapted from the MEM sex role inventory that was constructed in 1978. There were 38 total adjective options. I know they're hard to read there. And participants picked an average of 5 to describe the person in the story. And some of the options were that they were loyal, sincere, helpful, likable, friendly, etc. Next, they had a manager perception scale, which had 6 questions total, and they rated them on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, and 5 being strongly agree. And this helped me determine if the participants perceived the manager as being well-rounded and efficient or not. I'm going to go into that later. And then I had open-ended questions, which allowed the students to write in their own words how they felt about this person, and also helped explain their reasoning for forming certain opinions and reinforce their responses to the manager perception scale. And I ended up coding these as either positive or negative responses. So, my project was a little different because I worked with minors. So I had to receive special permission from the vice principal at the school, as well as the teacher that I was going to be working with. So I sent them home with this letter introducing myself and my project, along with a consent form that the parents had to sign in order for their child to participate. And they were given a week and a half to turn this in, and I had a 75% return rate, 65 out of 86 returned. And students who did not turn in their forms could not participate, and I could not accommodate for that. So I essentially spent an entire day in this classroom, and they were given the survey at the beginning of class with instructions, and they were encouraged to come and ask me any questions if they needed it. And it took them about 30 to 40 minutes to complete, and they were allowed to work on other things after completing the survey, and they were awarded extra credit in their classes for doing so. Okay, so this is the breakdown. I found the top 3, or in scenario 1, the top 4 most occurring adjectives. So there's a lot of overlap here. A lot of them are seen as friendly and likable, and the only difference is that the professional managers were seen for their independence and their leadership ability, and the other ones were seen as more helpful and things like that. On the manager perception scale, this was the average given to each scenario. The highest possible score was a 5, and the total mean of all scenarios was a 3.4. So scenario 2 and 3 fell well under the mean, and those were the the firm managers. And what I found was that scenario 3 was significantly different from scenario 1 and 4. And 1 and 4 were both the friendly managers. And also that scenario 4 was significantly different from 2 and 3. So here, the participants overwhelmingly favored the more friendly and helpful managers. So the manager is a good leader. This was question 1 on the manager perception scale, and again, scenario 4, the female and friendly, was significantly different from 2 and 3. So I think you can start to see like a trend here on who they're going to end up favoring. I think I would work well with this person was question 6 on the manager perception scale, and scenario 3, male and firm, was overwhelmingly lower than 1 and 4. And then finally, the manager seemed like they would help me if I need it, which was question 8 on the manager perception scale. And this is where 2 and 3 were overwhelmingly lacking. This was the scenario where they said they would give little or no support, and that their door was not open to them in any way. And so for the open response portion, The blue is positive responses and the red is negative. And I found that there was a significant relationship between all scenarios and their positive and negative responses. And you can see here that the positive responses in 1 and 4 are overwhelmingly higher compared to the other. And so some examples of these positive and negative responses were, he seems like a nice person, he's likable, and a person you can trust. And some negative ones were, this person was not helpful, she was rude and pushy, unreliable, and it was very overwhelming. Open response question 2, I also found a significant relationship between the positive and negative scores. And again, scenarios 1 and 4, very positive responses compared to the others. And so some positive responses for how the person made them feel was that they made them very comfortable, they were very welcomed and appreciated, and I can rely on them for help. And negative ones were, stressed and angry, frustrated, abandoned, like I was under a lot of unnecessary pressure. And finally, do you think you would work well with this person? What makes you feel this way? This was a combination of 3 and 4 because that they were related, so I ended up getting the same responses for each. And so my participants felt like they would work overwhelmingly well with scenarios 1 and 4, which were the friendly, more helpful, and supportive ones. And some positive responses were, she instills confidence in me, we had a relatable conversation, she's assertive and helps me stay on task. And some negative ones were that she wasn't very helpful, and you'd rather work with someone who would help achieve a common goal. So I also looked at some to see if there was any gender differences in this, because I thought maybe the females would prefer a female and the males a male, or vice versa. And I actually found that there was not. They all preferred the 4th scenario where the manager was female and very friendly and open and encouraging. The females rated her at a 3.87 and the males a 3.95 out of a total of 5, which is very high. And she was described as helpful, likable, and friendly. And 100% of my male participants reported that they would work well with this person, which was questions 3 and 4 on the open response portion. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So again, my hypothesis was that it is expected that men will be seen more favorably than women in the workplace, despite differences in managerial style. And what I overwhelmingly found was that that was not true, which is fine. I was actually pretty happy that it was true. And that my participants favored leadership style over gender. Some obvious limitations were I had a very small sample size. I could have maybe made the differences between each scenario more clear. I had a lot of questions about that during my actual procedure. Some other ones were that in typical public school, you have a lot of female teachers more often than male teachers. So that could have skewed their own perceptions just based on their own personal experience, like they maybe might have not had a lot of male teachers in the past. And for the future, I think it'd be kind of cool to do like a nationwide study if there are any like regional difference, ethnic difference, gender differences. And a longitudinal study might be different. I mean, it might be interesting to follow their perceptions. Do they change with age or experience, or does it really not matter, or something like that. And so, ultimately, my participants did not believe that the gender of the manager was important, just that their leadership style and the way they conduct themselves in the workplace ended up being more important to them. And possibility of eliminating gender inequality in the workplace and in other places. And that's it. Questions?
I have a question, Alexander.
Yeah.
So, this is all a positive reaction to what's happening. So, but I wonder though, you know, feelings about whether or not these, these folks will change our world as they grow older, or will the world change them to maintain the status quo? They grow older.
Are you asking my opinion?
Yes, yes, please.
Well, I think it's they kind of go hand in hand. As like laws start to change, people start to change. So I think they have the possibility, but it's ultimately like a long road. So who knows? Everyone said, my generation was the future. Now I'm looking at the high schoolers going, your generation was the future.
It's scary, isn't it?
So I don't know. I'll just put it on them. Yes.
I have a comment that's kind of related to Carlos's point, which is that, you hear so much about these generations of kids and how they are coddled and how they don't know how to, fend for themselves. And I find it interesting that they are gravitating towards leaders who are friendly and helpful and are going to help me, and I wonder if that's becoming more salient to them than gender. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a man or woman, as long as they're going to help me.
And I thought about that because in my other scenarios where the manager was strictly professional and offered like little to no help, a lot of it ended up being in the open response portion, personal preference. They said, I prefer someone who's going to let me be independent, and I prefer someone who, believes in me that I can do it. So that's why there was like lots of variation in those ones. But for the friendly ones, it was like, oh, I love this person. So and I thought about that a lot actually too. Anything, Janet?
I noticed that for the firm one, female and male, even the woman scored higher. Were you surprised by that?
I was because I think a lot of people feel like women have to be nicer, and so when they're not as nice, they're like, oh man, you're a bad word. And so when I saw that, because I got them all like mixed up in my head, so I started thinking that like that one was like the male. That's why they liked him more, but it turned out to be the other way around, and I just thought that was interesting as well. Yeah. Jocelyn, did you have a question?
It kind of goes back to what Dr. D was saying, where younger generations are starting to feel more coddled and they like the friendship role. Do you think that has to do with how a lot of startup companies do that with their friends? You have a more friendly environment, and so it's in a smaller area where people do tend to be more friendly with each other, and like bosses tend to want to be on like a similar level of employee.
Like a friend level.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it, and it is all about the environment that you work in as well. Because in bigger corporations, you're obviously going to have a very structural type, but you're right, in those smaller ones where it's just like 10 people, you're like all together. Yeah, so that's a good point too.
Alexander, what do you think this study would tell us about how young people are going to vote, particularly in the Democratic election, where there's a firm woman and a nice man? Like, what do you think about that?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of people have a problem with Hillary because they're like, oh, she's a woman, like maybe we should vote for her, right? And that's what a lot of people brought up in the conference. And a lot of young women were saying, like, well, just because she's a woman, that doesn't mean she's the right person for the job. So I think a lot of people feel like that way. And, you're right, Bernie does have like the grandpa factor going for him. And so, I don't know. It could go either way, I think, still.
Thank you.
How did they see the, maybe I missed this, were they reading a scenario with the manager? Did they watch a video? How was that presented to them?
Initially I was going to do a video, but that just proved to be impossible. So they were just reading a scenario, so whatever they got from it was strictly just whatever they read and then whatever they answered. There was no like imagery they could look at, no like voice differences or anything
So no
like
pictures
that.
of the people
No.
to influence?
It was
Okay.
strictly however they envisioned the person to be.
Do you think had you done this at Marymount, the results, in your opinion, would have been different?
That's a good question. I think it depends which classes I would have gone into. I think had I done it on a college campus, I probably would have done the video, just because I would have had access to more people and I wouldn't be so constrained by certain classes and time frame. And I do think it's more personal preference. I mean, in my experience, especially in the psychology department, I've had lots of like female professors, and they're all very different from one another. Like Dr. Mancuso is very, very different from like Smara. You know what I mean? Just in like teaching styles. So that would have been interesting, but I didn't want to do it here. Molly?
I thought it was interesting you just looking about it with kind of which class I went into, and you said that you specifically chose to go into a history class. I was wondering why a history class and what the gender of the teacher was.
So I went to the history class because I have a personal relationship with the teacher. So I figured if I was going to try anyone, he'd be more sympathetic to my cause and would help support me in this. So obviously the teacher's a man, and he's actually like a really well-liked person on campus. He was obviously my favorite teacher. And I think I got so much informed consent back because he's one of those teachers that like never offers extra credit. So as soon as they were like, extra credit, they were like, Mom, sign this. So, but that's interesting, and I don't know, I would say he's like very sarcastic, but he's also like trying to prep you for college, because it's an AP course, so he's more of that like, here, you have like way more to do at home than you do in the class, you know what I mean? So, they like the friendly guys too, just not as much as. Anything else? I have one more.
I was just wondering, I heard a lot about the likability and the preference of the management style and things like that, but what about respect? Did the word respect show up in their adjective list or leadership? I mean, was that any different between men and women?
Actually, no. I got some that were like the negative adjective associations. Some were like aloof and like unfriendly and like individual oriented, but nothing in terms of like very like respectful or like I would respect this person. So nothing like that, but that's a good point too. Yeah.
Did you find out if any of them actually had any work experience? Because in theory, of course, a friendly manager would be awesome, but sometimes it's also nice to have a hammer, and how many of those people have actually worked before?
Yeah, that was one of my questions on the demographic scale, was if you've had any work experience and where. And what I found was like a lot of them did, but in things like summer camp, volunteering at church, junior lifeguard, things like that. So nothing where they were actually like getting paid to do something. They were just volunteering their time to do it. So I think had I picked an older population, because you really can't work until you turn 16. Had I picked an older population, they would probably have more experience at like restaurants, fast food places, retail, and that probably would have changed their perception. Because you're right. I mean, management style definitely depends on where you work. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Brooke Botwinick. Welcome to my presentation. Thank you all for coming. So just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you've ever been in love before. Okay, that's a good chunk of you. So you're probably wondering why I asked that and why you have chocolate kisses sitting on your desk. And the reason is because my capstone presentation is called What is Love? The examination of how gender and relationships relate to love and intimacy. Oh, that went really fast. Okay. There we go. Okay, so the inspiration behind my capstone is from a class that I took abroad called Love, Beauty, and Natural Selection, the Science and the Myths, where we learned a lot about Darwin and evolution and how male and female views differ based on love. And so that class led to my capstone topic, and my research question is, how do gender and relationship status influence views of love and intimacy? Some of my existing research is done by Sternberg, and so So as you can see here, this is the triangular model of love, which includes intimacy, passion, and commitment. And these three styles or dimensions of love, according to Sternberg, are the three most fulfilling types of love. Additional existing research is done by Earlmaz and Abtec, which is the 5 important determinants of early stages of romantic intimacy, which are self-perception, behavioral intimacy, self-knowledge, romantic verbalization, and emotional and cognitive intimacy. I hypothesized that males are more likely to be focused on the sexual aspect of intimacy in relationships, while females are more likely to be focused on the emotional aspect of intimacy in relationships. Additionally, views will differ based on relationship status. I studied a total of 54 Marymount students between the ages of 18 and 25. There were 23 males and 31 females, and I recruited people on Capstone Day through the chapel circle asking people to take my survey. I went door to door at the dorms, and I asked 2 of my professors if I could survey their class, and luckily they said yes. For my procedures, I started out with informed consent, which briefly explains my survey. And participants need to sign the consent, agreeing to participate, and saying that they have the right to withdraw. After, I did a convenient survey, which is bias sampling for readily available subjects. I asked a series of demographic questions and more personal questions about love and intimacy. Then I did a debrief, which explains the purpose and asked students not to share the information of my survey with other participants. For my results, as you can see here, this is a graph about gender and relationship status. And the bottom shows that there are single, casual dating, in a relationship, married, and others. Those were the options in my survey. And there are significantly amount more single females than males, more that are single, and then more males than females that are casually dating, and the same amount of males and females that are in a relationship. For my study, I had a lot of open-ended questions, one of which included, how do you define love? And in order to code the answers, I read through each and every one of them and color-coded the similarities, and then turned the color coding into different themes and categories. So on your right, on the right is the categories, and on the left is an example of what the category is. So for here, caring and unconditional, an example of that would be unconditional, the ability to look past flaws, connecting and understanding, patience, kindness, and understanding, comfort and sharing, sharing personal thoughts, emotions, and feelings. More examples include deep, a soul's recognition of its counterpart, trust, the need of home and trust, and other, sadly, there's no such thing as love. For my results here, there was no comparison between, there's no correlation between how you define love and gender, and the bottom here shows the different categories and themes that I came up with, and bless you, there were several more females than males that fall into into the comfort and sharing category. For my results for how you define intimacy, these are more of the coding. This is more the coding that I did. And for the category desire and passion, an example of that would be mutual desire to be together physically and emotionally. For the sharing in private category, an example would be being able to see a side of someone else that they only share with you. For the personal connection category, an example would be being able to be your true self with someone you love. For sex, having sexual relations with someone. And for other, magic. For this, for how do you define intimacy and gender, the bottom shows all of the different categories, and the red is female and the blue is male, and there is no correlation between how people define intimacy and gender. However, I thought it was interesting because, as you recall, I hypothesized that males are more likely to be focused on sex in relationships, while women are more likely to be focused on emotions. But here it shows otherwise, that females were answered how you find intimacy as being sex, while males, like 13%, chose that category. There was a relationship between how people define love and relationship status. And as you can see across the board, there's a lot of variability, and a lot of people that are in a relationship fell into the other category, and a lot of people who are single or not dating fell into the caring and willing to do anything for a category. For how you define intimacy and relationship status, there was no relationship between the two. However, I found it interesting that there was a lot of variability among the graph, and there were a lot of people that were in a relationship that fell into the desire and passion category, and a lot of people that are casually dating that fell into the other category, and people who are single who fell into the personal connection theme or category. Was my hypothesis supported? My hypothesis was not supported. There were more similarities than differences among gender in relationship to love and intimacy, and relationship status in relationship to love and intimacy. Additionally, overall, gender and relationship status did not correlate. However, I found it really interesting when asking how do you think male and female views of love and intimacy differ, that 52%, including 9 males and 8 females, said that males were more likely to be focused on the physical part of intimacy, and females would be more likely to focus on the emotional aspect of intimacy. Okay. For my limitations, it includes the amount of people studied, asking people about sexual orientation, and identity among emerging adults. Ideas for future research. This backs up my limitations. It would be great for the future to have a larger sample size, studying people outside of Marymount, perhaps in other universities in the state or in the country. And a lot of the past research that I read had to do with identity exploration and self-esteem. So it would be really interesting to relate identity exploration and self-esteem to love and intimacy in future research. Take-home message. Everyone defines love in their own way, and people experience intimacy differently. It is really important to make time for love and intimacy in your life because it leads to happiness. of is making someone's heart smile. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, when you go back up to your first paragraph slide that had the relationship status by gender.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that one here.
Mhm.
So I wonder if for the men, the men, and then also the women, they may be involved in the same relationship, but the men who are casually dating, or the woman, you might define it as being casual, where the man gets to that point in the relationship, he is still single.
Mhm.
So I wonder if that was kind of a way to explain why here it looks like more women said that they were. And I actually know it's the opposite to say that women saying that they're single and men saying that they're casual. So
Wait, sorry, what was the question?
I realized that I had read it differently earlier. So it looks like here it's almost the same a higher number of women who said they are single. As it's inverse on the casual dating. So I wonder if they are both involved in the same relationship, but the women at that point are saying that they are single, while the men at that point are saying they're casual dating.
Well, I think that because in my study I asked it was a closed-ended question, so they didn't have much room to talk about what casual dating meant to them. So I think it would be interesting for future research to maybe have it be an open-ended question so they can explain their relationship.
Okay.
Or maybe it's that the women see it as single or married, right? And so when they were only given those choices, maybe they chose single.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Do you have any date, how old were the people that you sampled? Were they freshmen or seniors?
They were between the ages of 18 and 25. I didn't ask what year they were, what level they were at, but I asked how old they were. Anything else?
I have another question.
Okay.
Yeah, what was the source of your hypotheses that men will focus more on sex and the women will focus more on emotions?
What was the source?
How did you arrive at that hypothesis?
From reading past research and also through personal experiences. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Whithoon. I will be presenting my capstone on test anxiety and academic performance. The reason I chose this is because in high school I had an experience in which I was preparing for a test and I was completely ready for it, and I had all the information I needed, and then I got down and they gave me the test and I completely blanked out on everything and I did not do as well as I had hoped. So I wanted to explore that in college students. So test anxiety occurs when students are placed in a situation in which they're being evaluated. It is a situation-specific type of anxiety, and some stressors and triggers of test anxiety could be thinking about the consequences of a test, thinking about and worrying about the test, and also not having confidence in one's ability to do well on the test. So it can generally be defined as the feelings of nervousness and anxiousness that one feels that are associated with test taking. Research on the role of test anxiety has shown that the probability is raised of doing poorly on a test when there is test anxiety. It also has effect on memory. In a study conducted by Cassidy in 2004, they gave students a test that was just like a regular test, and then they gave them a post-survey, and it had them explain how they felt while they were taking the test, what they were feeling before, and then how they felt after when they saw their results. And then another research study showed that it has effects on the memory as well, so even if you know all the information before the test, your anxiety can cause you to forget about what you have learned. So my research questions are, does test anxiety have an effect on a college student's academic performance? So does it cause the grades to drop, or does it cause you to perform lower on the test? And does test anxiety levels differ between students with higher GPA and students with a lower GPA? So in this study, I measured academic performance by GPA. So my hypothesis is that it is hypothesized that students with a lower GPA will have more test anxiety than students with a higher GPA. So my participants, there was 55, and I took them from Psych 150 classes. The age range was from 18 to 23, and the mean age was 18.75 because my sample was mostly freshmen. Some demographics are shown here, and no compensation was offered to the participants. So my data was collected by survey. While I was constructing my survey, I noticed that some of the research I did, they were using Likert scales and questionnaires. So I took this into consideration when constructing my survey. The GPA on the survey was self-reported, and there was a test anxiety scale that was designed by Dr. David Driscoll in 2007. There's 10 items on the scale, and it was rated from 1 to 5, 1 being not at all or never true, and 5 being extremely or always true. And there's 2 dimensions of anxiety being measured. 1 was the worry aspect, and 2 was the memory aspect of anxiety. So some sample questions, these are statements that the students rated from 1 to 5. When I study for my exams, I worry that I will not remember the material on the exam. That would be an example of worry. After an exam, I worry about whether I did well enough. That is also an example of worry. And I lose focus on important exams, and I cannot remember material that I knew before the exam. That is an example of a memory question. So my procedure, first I handed out consent forms to the students, and it had information on, I introduced myself and gave a brief introduction of my study. And the consent form had information on if they wanted to stop, they can stop the study at any time, and that it would not, their responses on the survey would in no way be connected to them. So the survey took them about 3 to 5 minutes to complete, and then I gave them a debriefing form with information on who they can contact if they had any questions about the survey, and deception was not used in any way on my survey. So here is a table with my descriptive results or the overall sample. The GPA was 3.23, that was the average, so it's about a B average. The test anxiety level was 3.26, meaning that it was in the middle, but it leaned a little bit to the higher level of anxiety. And the worry aspect was 3.47, which is a little high, and the memory was 3.12. So my results, for the whole group, which was 52 since 3 of my participants did not report GPA, there was no significant difference in test anxiety between high GPA and low GPA. And so what I did was there was a subsample of 16 participants based on extreme high GPA and extreme low GPA. The extreme high was 2.75, or the extreme low was 2.75, and the extreme high was 3.71. So the subgroup, there was a higher GPA. They had significantly less test anxiety than students with a low GPA. So here is a graph, and you can see that the GPA of 2.75 has a much higher level of 3.6, and the lower GPA has a lesser level of 2.81. So the memory versus worry. Students with a low GPA had significantly higher memory anxiety scores when compared to students with a high GPA. This could be that sometimes maybe when they study harder that sometimes they'll lose the information because of their anxiety while they're taking the test. And then there was no significant difference found in the worry aspect of anxiety. Even though the score was a little high, it was not significantly different between the two groups. So, summary of my findings, my hypothesis was supported. Students with a lower GPA did have higher anxiety than students with a higher GPA. There was not a significant difference in the worry aspect of anxiety, but there was one in memory. And some limitations of my study was that gender was not taken into account. So on my survey, there was no place to say if you were male or female. The major, I did have a spot on the survey where they can say what their major was, but I did not use it in any of my analysis. And the sample class standing was not very diverse, so I had mostly freshmen because I went into a Psych 150 class, or 2 Psych 150 classes, and what I could do in the future is I could go to like a junior seminar class and get more students that way, or I could go to like a senior capstone class and get more seniors, so my sample would be more diverse in the future if I were to redo this study. So the take-home message is that we can implement this research to help students with test anxiety. Here at Marymount, we have the MASS program, which is the Mariner Academic Strategies and Techniques program. It is with the Learning Center, so you can get peer tutoring, or you can get assistance with your test-taking skills, and maybe we can implement something that's specific to test anxiety so we can help students do better on test performance. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I wonder if you had looked at sort of flipping your independent and dependent variable and seeing whether test anxiety impacted GPA, or if you looked at that. Right, you kind of found that GPA is related to test anxiety.
Yeah.
Did you look in the other direction?
Not really. I did look at the worry aspect of anxiety, so I wanted to see if maybe that influenced the lower GPA, but I didn't really look at the other way around, what you're asking.
I'd be curious to see that,
Yeah, that
right?
would be
Because
interesting.
you'd want to see, right, if the
Right.
anxiety is actually
Right.
having an impact on GPA. You
Yeah.
do a correlation to it.
Right, because it would be that students with a lower GPA, they have more to worry about, like their grades can suffer, or maybe they have shame from their families or something, so they do have more factors.
But it could be that the worry is making their grades
Yeah.
low, right? Too. Probably a cycle.
Probably. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Hello, my name is Megan Shaver, and my capstone is on the mother and daughter relationship of health habits. And so first of all, I want to say how close me and my mom have always been. We really enjoy doing activities that being outside together, and one of them, the main one, would be hiking. And so one time while we were hiking, I thought to myself, how do health habits form? And who influences our health habits? And so my mom is a big influence on my health habits, and I've picked up some of hers, I know, but as I've grown up, some of them have changed, because that's what habits, habits can change. And then, so as I began looking for past information on my topic, I found a few studies that examined the relationship of health, parents, and child. And so first I came across a 6-year study on children of mothers with eating disorders. And so researchers found that mothers' eating disorders did affect their child's emotional future. And the children with mothers with an eating disorder had aggressive behavior, they were withdrawn, anxious, and depressed. And then my next study, I found one where researchers created a body image scale, and it examined the body satisfaction among children. And they found that there was a high rate of body dissatisfaction with these children, and that a small size was desired at a very young age. And then my third, I came across a study where researchers looked into the possible factors for children's preoccupation with thinness. The children's eating behaviors were recorded, and so were the parents' feelings towards their own weight. And they found that the major influences were their fathers, peers, and media. And they also found that parental influence on a child is greater than media, which I found really interesting. And then the questions that I'm asking are a mother's health habits related to her daughter's health habits? What specific aspects of mother's health behaviors relate to her daughter's health habits? And finally, my hypothesis is mothers who have an unhealthy exercise routine and unhealthy eating habits will have daughters that reflect those exact habits. And so the participants in my study were 57 female online users. I found on Facebook in 2 women-only groups. The first group contains 1,500 users, and the second group contains 18,000 female users, and so both groups are a place for women all over the world to network with each other. And so my participants' ages ranged from 18 to 71 with the average age of 26. The average weight was 137 pounds. The average BMI was 23. And the majority of my participants were white. You can't really see it, but it's 77%. 9% were of mixed race, and 9% were Hispanic, 3% were Middle Eastern, and 2% were African American. Okay. And so like I said, my online survey was distributed through Facebook, and it asked questions pertaining to current health, childhood health, and the mother's health during participants' childhood. And so first, in current health, the participants were shown a body image scale, and they were asked to choose an image most similar to their own. And the female illustrations were shown on a scale from 1 to 9. And then participants were also asked on how healthy they believed to be on a scale from 1 to 4. Participants were given also 3 yes or no questions asking about their present diet, and an example question was, do you eat breakfast every day? And finally, participants were asked how many times they exercise a day on a scale from 0 to 3. And then in childhood health, childhood diet was measured. Childhood diet was examined on a scale from 0 to 4. And an example question was, as a child, how many times a week did you eat out? And under exercise, participants were asked if they played sports when they were a child. And their answer was then used to track their past involvement in exercise. And then in the mother's health, during the participants' childhood, participants were asked how often their mother exercised a week on a 0 to 3 scale. Participants were also asked if their mother experienced major stress at this time, and they were asked to describe the extent of possible stress. In the procedure section, in the online survey, a description was presented to the participants as an official invitation. Participants were prompted with an online informed consent. They provided an electronic signature before beginning, and there was no compensation, and the survey was designed to take up to 10 minutes. So in my results, I found for the present, the participants averagely selected the body image, it says 3.93, so like in between the 3 and the 4, they averagely chose. And the extent of healthiness, the average was 2.79. The average diet was 1.42. The average exercise was 1.35. And in childhood, the average diet was 2.95. And 77% of participants played sports when they were younger. In the mothers during participants' childhood, the exercise was an average of 1.18. And 58% of participants saw their mother experience stress when they were younger. And then relating to age and body image, the younger group reported significantly smaller body image than the older group. And relating BMI and body image, participants who selected a higher body image also had a higher BMI. And in weight relating to body image, participants who selected a higher body image also had a larger weight. And then in diet, I found that participants who describe themselves as healthy also have a balanced diet, and so the scatter plot is going up, which is positive. And then when I tried to relate present health and childhood diet, there was no significance, which means a balanced childhood diet did not affect the participant who describes herself healthy. And I also found the similar result in childhood diet and present diet. Childhood diet was not related to present diet. And I found in exercise that participants who were involved in sports exercise more now than participants who were not involved in sports. And I also found that participants who were involved in sports had mothers who exercised more when compared to mothers of daughters who are not in sports. And I also ultimately found that present exercise and mother's exercise is not significant, but the trend was approaching, so it was close to significance. And then after examining maternal stress, I found that stressed mothers had daughters who ate less healthy than children with less stressed mothers. And I also found that maternal stress is not significant to the participants' current diet, which I found really interesting. And then overall, I found that present health is related to how one is eating, and how one ate as a child is related to mother's stress. How one is exercising currently is related to exercise in childhood, but childhood exercise is related to mother's exercise. And so I found that my hypothesis is supported. Childhood eating habits were affected by the mother's stress. Childhood exercise routines were affected by the mother's exercise habits. And then in my limitations and further studies, I believe, or I found that, women aren't very honest when it comes to their weight or diet. And so I felt like me asking them what their weight was, they probably lied, obviously. And so I thought in the next study they could ask participants to use a scale and actually get an exact number of that. And then the majority of my participants were white, and so it would be really interesting to see the participants with a different ethnic background. And then also I focused on all female to their mothers, and so it would be interesting to see on the other side of the gender scale, which would be the male, so father to son relationship. And then with time, in the past studies, they all did a 6-year study or a long period of time, and I did not have that opportunity. So it would be interesting to do the same study, but just over a long period of time. And then also, I felt like participants could have been confused with certain questions online, and so it would be interesting to find and conduct in-person survey and give the participant the chance to answer any of their questions. And finally, why is this topic important? So mothers are the role models for their daughters. They impact their daughter's future. And my study gives mothers the areas of health which are the most influential to their daughters. And so when mothers review my study, they have the chance to provide a healthy lifestyle for their daughters to follow. And thank you.
Questions for Megan?
Megan, I missed it. The 2 websites you used as your resource, were they for women with already eating problems, or just? Okay.
They looked into the mothers with eating disorders, and then so they started the time period. They started the children from a very young age and examined their development with having a mother who has an eating disorder and how it affected them growing up, basically.
And one had 18,000 members?
Oh.
That's what I meant.
Oh, okay, yeah. The group, the women that I got them from. It's like an online Facebook group. It's called Girls Night In and Girls Night Out. There's multiple kind, and it's just basically women all over. They post professional help, if anybody needs like a roommate, like surveys like mine, or just they share silly, funny stories. It's just really a place for women to connect.
But not necessarily eating disorders.
Yeah, no,
stress
not
people.
not
Okay.
that specific. Just it has a whole range.
Normal.
Yeah.
It's normal.
Yeah.
Did you include in your survey education level for the women?
No, I didn't, and that would be interesting. I didn't think about that. That would be really interesting to see if maybe they know about, what health habits are the best and which aren't.
Congratulations, though. Great finding.
Thank you. Thank you.
Michael Sotelo Valle. I am a senior here at Marymount, California University, and this is my capstone project for Psychology 498, titled They're Coming to America. Okay, so this is my introduction, and basically the capstone project, as many of you know, is a year-long duration project, and one of the key aspects that has been made known to us by instructors throughout this entire time is that we should make it a project that we want to do, focus on the subject we want to do. I wanted to do multiculturalism because I have an interest in learning about other cultures. So I decided to focus on culture shock. It can be, in a way, considered a form of social chemistry because of the types of reactions it can have with it. So my research questions focus on 4 aspects. The experience that foreign international students have in America, what their interactions are like with the locals, are they likely to return to America after their visit has been concluded, and do they feel American while they are staying here? So I used 2 articles in order to help point out culture shock. Ward, from 1999, takes her students on yearly trips to a European Tyrol, which is a village, essentially, located in Austria. And the reason why it serves as such a prime example of culture shock is because they are American students, so they're used to a certain level of modernity, having access to electricity. This European Tyrol did not have electricity. It's a very rural setting, almost like moving in with the Amish. A lot of the modern technology and advances that they have were not available at the time. It serves as a prime example as well because of the varying levels of adjustment and adaptation they all exhibited. Some of them adjusted well, others did not. Now, this unfortunately does not count as an empirical piece because it focuses more on personal experience, making it more theoretical in research terms. Now, the Russian experience from 2001, as written by Hewer and Benjamin, focuses on American nurses going to Eastern Europe, specifically Russia, as it says on the tin, and their experiences there. Now, the key factor here is that Russia's very different societal, traditional, and also infrastructural aspects become known to us. The homes that the nurses were put into are very old, very dilapidated structures. They have questionable water quality to access for hygiene and other needs and requirements. They also had no visible sight of an overly displayed middle class. What they did notice was that while the museums were very extravagant and luxurious, the masses themselves exhibited very high levels of poverty. Now, they do show this as being empirical because interviews were conducted before the nurses left to Russia for their short trip, and then also were conducted again after they came back as a sort of A-B template. Also, interviews were conjoined with journals written by the nurses to provide insight into their experience. Now, unfortunately, even though this does count as an empirical example of culture shock, largely there are very few examples to follow this. Most of the time, culture shock is used as an accenting element. So it goes towards accenting politics, statistics, societal functions, but it is not usually the focus behind the research. My hypothesis is study abroad students that have a positive experience in America will be more likely to return to America. Now, the methodology is somewhat complicated, but not necessarily. The participants' total number was 14. The ages ranging from 18 to 22, the average of which was 19, give or take a year in accordance with standard deviation. They were not local students at all. They were all foreign-born, international, study abroad. 9 of them came from China, then 1 came from Russia, 1 from Canada, 1 from Ireland, 1 from Venezuela, and 1 from Korea. Compensation was limited to 1 option only, and that was dependent on the days of recruitment. Research Day participants were put into a raffle, and for the King's Education Day, there was no compensation. They are foreign-born students, so they were receiving teachings in preparation to communicate in English, writing, speaking, and reading. And they were either studying at Marymount or the King's Education Attachment. Now, the materials are more or less the same in both settings, but Research Day is actually a more open environment, so I had to call out the students. King's Education was in a classroom environment, so they were more collective that way, and also faculty and staff were present there. But in both circumstances, I had all the proper documentation and writing implements, and there were also spaces available for students to write at, desks essentially. Now, the survey that was designed and implemented in this project was designed to actually measure several variables with a Likert scale. Basically ratings from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. And the higher the rating was, the higher the number, the greater the value. So interaction rating basically refers to how well they believe they've interacted with others while here in America. The preparations is basically referring to how prepared they were when they came here. Do they know the languages? Do they know the customs, the laws, the rules, the norms? There was also the averaging of likeliness to return, which composed of 3 sub-elements: study, visit, and live, in regards to why they would return, if they did. And then interaction preferences referred to their wanting and their actual mingling with others while here in America, versus the difficulty in doing so. Now, the general experience is composed of 5 elements. So there is excitement, or the general joy that they felt. There is the confusion, or the level of uncertainty or fear that they had. Their want to fit in, as well as their feeling of Americans, how much of a local they felt as, and self-isolation, how interactive they were with others. The procedure is, as I said, similar. So in both cases, it basically boils down to this. Students were offered an opportunity to participate in surveys. It was entirely optional. They did not have to participate in it, and it was emphasized at that point. They would not be impacted grade-wise with or without their participation, and those who did choose to participate could feel free to stop at any time, at any moment. At the same time, I had to do 2 separate things. First, with King's Education, I actually had to speak with the faculty and staff to gain their approval and make sure the survey met their standards. The Research Day was more of a calling out to the students. So whichever students were available at the time, I called out to them, I offered. If they said yes, then great. If they did not, then they moved on. They, of course, had to meet the requirements of being 18 or older, foreign-born, and international study abroad. Relevant ethical concerns. So the concerns were relatively low. Doesn't matter what kind of project you're doing, they always carry some level of concern, but this one was very minuscule. Surveys were designed to be anonymous to protect the identity of all participants. Basic demographic information, including where they came from, what language they spoke, and their age. Nothing beyond that. Contact information was made abundantly available in case they had questions pertaining to the project or the results thereof. And again, it was emphasized that they had the right to participate, to refuse to participate, or to cease participation at any point, all without impacting their grade. These are the results that I was able to collect. Now, it gets a little complicated here, so the next graphs that you will see will make it much more clear. The topmost portion are averages in themselves. So essentially, it's an average of averages, which does make it confusing. But it is also, again, a small sample size of 14 students. So this is a lot of numbers, but the graphs paint a clearer picture. So in general, what was noted was that all statistically significant correlations were positive in association, which basically means that the increase of one, it doesn't matter what position on the graph it is, will lead to the increase of the other. So interaction rating played an actually very strong role as it influenced 5 other elements, the 5th one being more or less indirect, but 4 other elements were impacted. Likeliness to return was involving the return to study and the return to visits. Return to live was not statistically significant. Feeling American, interaction rating impacted how American one felt, and it also, one could say as well, indirectly impacted the desire to fit in, mainly because feeling American also impacted the desire to fit in. So one could say A impacted B, which impacted C. What you could essentially say is A impacted C. Now, there was, of course, some failure in adjustment. Not everybody was able to go ahead and adjust so easily, and there was expected trouble with that. Confusion, reflecting fear or uncertainty, was positively associated with self-isolation. And it makes sense if you think about it. What you don't understand, you tend to keep away from. Supplemental analysis include the 5th element, well, the 4th element technically, for interaction rating, which was excitement. And preparation rating is what impacted the return to live part of likeliness to return. So preparation rating, the readiness before coming to America, influenced the return to live, not interaction rating. So it played a much lesser role in the entire project. Conclusions, and this is just a word summary of everything I've said, were as follows. Interaction rating played a part in influencing directly influencing 4 elements. So the return to study, return to live, excitement, and feeling American. Desire to fit in was impacted by how American one felt. The likelihood of returning to settle in America was associated with the amount of preparation made prior to this current visit. And then confusion was also positively associated with self-isolation. More confused meant more self-isolation. There were limitations, however. Participants were limited in their English speaking skills. They were receiving lessons from King's Education or from Marymount to improve, but it was vastly overestimated, which also led to some confusion with the survey. Instructions were too complicated for them to actually get a full grasp on. So while they were instructed to fill in one box, they filled in several with long sentences instead of just single word responses. The investigator was not always present. I, being the investigator, was more or less going from one classroom in the King's Education scenario to the other. So while I did provide the distribution, and I also explained the nature of the project and provided the debriefs altogether, I was not there to help them respond, relying on the faculty to actually do that. The survey questions themselves needed to be more specific, more narrow. It was too broad and open-ended. In one of the questions, I was asking them, what do you expect of America? And somebody put down Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman. And I did not know what to do with that. So there was insufficient categories for responses. The open-ended questions were basically null and void. They were too numerous to properly categorize. In future reference, I need to use more Likert scales and rating systems, and the questions themselves as well as instructions need to be more simply worded. Future research should be more prominently focused on cross-cultural interactions, so basically more emphatical on culture shock. Culture shock needs to be the center of empirical research because there's not much of it available. Usually it becomes the accenting element. It needs to be the center. Translators and interpreters, when it comes to a complicated survey of this nature, could serve as being more accurate in trying to get the point across, helping them to understand the question and then responding to it more effectively. The implications behind this, the takeaway message is this: understanding a foreign student's experience in America helps us to develop new programs to better facilitate their needs. So it could help them to actually interact with others, help them to better integrate into America itself, and basically make them more social, more open. Now, this also separates itself into another aspect, promoting cultural awareness, understanding, and acceptance. A lot of what seems to be occurring these days is that people who are not aware of another culture, of another person's culture, tend to look at it negatively. And that could be from a very strong lack of understanding. Helping to relieve local tensions stems from the third point. So this whole us versus them mentality, if you look around well enough, you will actually see a lot of excessive groups that actually promote this sort of thinking. If it's not this way, then it's wrong. It's un-American. We speak English, not Spanish. Using this kind of focus, we can actually help them to understand it need not be that way. At the same time, we can also focus on improving immigration in politics, developing procedures that function, not just build a wall around the borders. Thank you.
Questions for Michael?
I have two questions.
Okay.
Did you ask specifically anything about culture shock in terms of, I found this difficult while I was here, or did you ask them anything about things that surprised them or that they were,
Well, actually, yes, I did. I did ask them what they found to be different, but again, it was an open-ended question. And the problem with that is that they found a lot of things different, too broad, in fact, and they could overlap with one another, creating a huge mess in statistical variations. So one person might focus on food, another on social structure, another on politics, another on Disneyland, and it just becomes a huge mess.
I would have been interested to see some of those answers anyway, like just to see if there was anything in there, even if they were from, varying categories, it would have been really interesting.
The thing was, it was many, many responses, and it was like one of each, so it would have been very difficult to categorize all of them.
Sure.
Your second question?
If you go back to your scatter plots for a second, if you, wonder if you could comment on, these are correlations, right?
Yes.
So you can't say which one caused which one, even though it seemed like you were trying to go in one direction. Could you comment maybe on people who are already more excited to come here? Maybe they do more interacting and so on. Like maybe if you switch which one you think might be the independent and the dependent variable, you might get an effect of personality, for example, right? People who come here who have a certain personality might be more likely to interact anyway. You know what I'm saying?
It's bidirectional, what did you say?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a bivariate correlation.
Mhm.
It's, actually, yeah, that personality influence was not exactly what I was looking for, but that
Sure.
is something to put down.
So if it's correlation, you just have to be aware of the idea that it could be that one caused the other, but it could be in the reverse also. Because I think it was the one maybe before this. Yeah, that one. I think I was thinking that people who are maybe already more likely to self-isolate, that it may be that they are already confused. Do you know what I mean? That it's not a causal relationship, but that they're just related.
Actually, yeah, that is a valid point in the sense that they have something at home and they're bringing it with them.
Right.
That was an outside variable that was not accounted for.
And if you go to the slide just before this one too, I thought of that there as well, right? That maybe they already, you know, felt sort of American. I'm going to America, I'm studying abroad, and that increased their likelihood to want to interact.
So
Just
then-
a comment, it's just a comment that.
So in a future survey, one might put down how American did you feel before, during, and after?
I think it's just a comment on the interpretation of these results that make sure that you're not talking about it as interaction caused them to feel more American, because it could have been the other way around.
All right. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Did you find any correlation on the answers from the students? Anything common that stuck out? I mean, maybe just like you said, food, because that's a very important part of culture from any country really that I can think about.
Well, in terms of the open-ended questions?
I mean, in any other questions, do you find that if there's one common perspective or desire or?
Not outside of the Likert scale systems. Typically, the Likert scale systems help you to define the most common aspects, but in the open-ended ones, there were some recurring responses. Food, the availability of food, and the type of food that was available did seem to pop up at least more than 5 or 6 times. Unfortunately, between 14 students and that question being asked in different ways, it really did not make sense to put that down. And once again, with the vast categories being used for each different question set, it would have made a huge motley of a mess. So there was no actual way to define or correlate that. Mr. Rand?
Yes, I had a comment and a question I think there too. In grad school, I did a study where I examined the perceptions of Black students and also how that impacted their, so that you get involved in different groups, but also services on campus. And sorry, I also wanted to ask them, their perception of white students' perceptions of them as Black students. I also did another portion of that where I examined white students, asking them what were their perceptions of Blacks. So I wanted to see if there's a matching of what Blacks thought whites felt and also what whites actually felt. So with that being said, what would be curious here was about their perceptions about the American students and them being open to them, and how could that be an impact on their getting involved and their feeling that fit in. Because they can want to be involved as they want to, but we feel like that we're not involved enough, that could also be a offense or a gate to do that as well.
So what you're basically saying was, why was I lacking a perception, cross-perception comparison?
No, I wasn't criticizing it. Also, I wasn't saying about the lacking part. It was just a comment, I guess, about how their perceptions of the students here may impact these results.
Well, initially the idea had been to create a comparison project, and what the idea was, we were going to have an American side so that we can gain an understanding for how they perceive things on the foreign side, and then also have a foreign side to see how they perceive things on the American side, thereby creating a sort of cross-perception. The problem with that is that, as it was, for a year-long study, it was hard enough just to do the foreign portion. Doing an American portion would have required additional resources and work that honestly would have also been somewhat one-sided, considering I probably could have gotten more Americans, more locals, I should say, to participate in the project than foreigners. So it would have been very lopsided.
It would also be interesting to compare the different cultures, and Sally might be able to comment on this, right? That most of these students were Chinese, and how is that contributing, sort of what their culture brings here?
What I'm observing is that you've got fantastic studying, research, and a start. But it's, I think for all of us, as I've mentioned in research, it gives you ideas for more things it is that you could do and find out different things. And because you've got the students' background, like were the students from China, people who came more from certain specialized education programs over in China where they used to this. So, I mean, that's why research can go on. It's a lifelong process. So there's so many different wonderful things that you could continue to do, but you are only here for, what, 10 more days, so you'll have to.
10 more days in 2 years.
And
2 years.
grad
Oh,
program.
in 2 years. Great, so we're gonna be here, so you can do more research on different things you want to do, Michael.
Actually, one thing I was talking about was, what if I did a capstone on capstone students?
That's a great idea.
And we could call that capstone inception. Boom, boom. The school folds in on itself. So are there any other questions anybody wants to ask?
That's great, Michael. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Yasmin Chavez, and I will be talking to you about pattern recognition and memory in older and young adults. My inspiration for this topic came from Family Game Night. We were playing the game Just Dance in the Lead, and it's about different dance patterns that were given to you. You had to know them at a certain amount of time. And in my family, there's kids from like 13, 14 years old to my aunts and uncles who are in like their 60s. And the kids were able to grab it and play with it really quick, and they were getting dance moves really fast. And my aunts and uncles, they struggled a bit more, and I don't know why, and then just got my attention. And that's what brought me to my question, which is a person's ability to memorize pattern, identify differences depending on their age. Like I mentioned, my aunts and uncles, they struggled. I don't know if it was because they were too focused on the kids and watching them dance, or they were too busy enjoying the music, but somehow there was some difference there. So I looked into this, and I found some research saying that recognizing information is harder in older adults, and their ability to recognize it, whether it's right or wrong, takes some time. And also that the way information is processed will vary depending on past experience and knowledge with that situation. Referring to like the game, was it because my aunts and uncles don't experience playing with the games? Was it the dance itself? Was it the program? What was it? So that's how it could have changed there. And also an older adult's ability to succeed in explicit memory tests does decrease as they're older. So what explicit memory is like as information like facts that you're presented with. But what am I going to be looking for in this? What I found in my study was pattern recognition, memory, and age. And what pattern recognition is being presented with an object and be able to identify it and classify it into groups. And then what memory is just being presented with some sort of information and being able to store it, retrieve it whenever you need it. And age, we all know what age is. It's just how old we are and how long you're present. So my hypothesis for the study was that older adults will have a difficult time in identifying the correct images compared to younger adults, and I'll explain what an image I'm referring to in a little bit. For my study, I had 46 participants involved. 24 of them were younger adults. Their ages range between 18 to 26, and the average age was about 22 years old. And the older adults, their ages range between 55 and 83, and their median age was 72. The younger adults were all Marymount students. They were gathered from either research day, or I walked into a couple of classrooms and gathered participants there. And the older adults were both from Marymount, California faculty and staff, and also active seniors from an active senior center in the city of Commerce. What happened was I asked participants if they wanted to participate in a memory test, and those that said yes, I gave them a consent form, and I explained to them that they would be taking a test, which I will go into great detail on the next slide, and there would be a questionnaire asking background information regarding their age, occupation, and after that, I gave them a debriefing form and explained to them what the study was about. So this is an example of what the test looked like. There were 10 different trials, and each image like this was presented for 10 seconds. So what they had to do is they had to memorize a slide and then they were shown with a slide like this one, and they had to identify the image from here. And they also had 10 seconds to identify it from these three. This is 3 statements down here are from the questionnaire. Participants had to rate how the statement pertained to them regarding the test. They had to answer using a Likert scale from 1 to 5. 1 being strongly disagree to 5 being strongly agree. And what I found was that the average score for young adults was 8, and for older adults it was 7.45. And I did a t-test showing that there was some significance in how age reflected in their ability to memorize. So this is the first statement that I looked at. I guessed on 5 or more trials. And you can see from the average scores from both the young adults and the older adults, as they agreed with the statement, scores went down, meaning that those that guessed, sorry, that's my train of thought. I guess on 5 or more trials, their scores went down, and it seemed that there was a relationship between age and their ability to judge it. Statement 2, I got all of the trials correct. Those that agreed, their scores were higher for both the younger and older adults. However, the younger adults did score higher. And also with statement 3, I got more than 5 trials wrong. Those that did agree with that statement got lower scores for both the younger and older adults. There was one participant, the younger adults, that got a 10 and said that they did agree with the statement. I don't know what happened there. Either they misread the statement or they just circled whatever, but I have an outlier there, which kind of messed up the body a little bit. And in the older adults, there was no one that said that they agreed with the statement. I also looked at the 10 different trials to see if there was any trend or if there was anything odd there, and I found that participants had more trouble with the first trial and got that wrong 70% of the time, and that the second trial was also the easiest out of the 10 trials for participants. So what does this mean? My hypothesis was slightly supported. Adults did have a slightly harder time identifying the patterns that they were presented with, and as I showed you, the younger adults did score better. Also, I found that younger adults are better at judging their ability than older adults, which is pretty interesting. And as I mentioned before, trial 1 was the hardest, and the test overall was probably a little easy since on average they got about 80% of the trials correct. But what were my limitations in the study were that all the young adults were all students, so if the results could have been different if the young adults could have been both students and non-students. And also, the older adults, their occupations, some of them did include education, which might have skewed their relationships there, because you're in the education field, you're constantly using your memory and having to learn and adapt to different situations. So what I would like to do in the future study would be to see how a person's ability to memorize, to see how their ability is, how aware people of their memory ability. So are they consciously aware of their memory, or are they just guessing on it? So what we can take away from this is to be aware how information is presented to older adults and understand that the way we might be presenting to them may not be the best way, and make sure that they're understanding it versus just telling them and expecting them to know, because they may not be aware that they're actually retaining information that's given to them. And also, I noticed that verbal and visual information declines with their age. When I presented the test to participants, the younger adults did not struggle and understood the instructions perfectly, and the older adults did struggle. Some of them, as the test went on, would ask, "What am I doing again? Is this the way I'm supposed to do it? Can you please explain to me? I'm not sure," which I found to be interesting. And also we can learn is our own awareness of things. Are we aware of our memory at a young age, as we're in the middle age, as we're older, or does it just pertain to certain people in my study? And I would like to thank Dr. Del Pietra, Dr. Kishenda, and Dr. Lopez for helping me with my study. And I'd like to thank you all for being here today. And questions? Yes.
Yeah, so out of curiosity, were all of your older adults familiar and comfortable using the computer?
Some of them did kind of question like what they had to do. They asked me, do I just sit here? Some asked about the glare on the screen because there was trouble with lighting at times. But they were pretty comfortable. They didn't say they had trouble with it.
Okay, just wondering.
No, it's
My
okay.
mother in her 70s has never touched one before, and
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
Okay.
like I explained to them, like here's a computer, just sit there, and they'll change when they're down. And
Okay.
they were comfortable with that. You went first. I saw you went first.
Do you think that, so you mentioned that trial one, it scored lower, right? People had more trouble with it. Do you think that that was because people were still getting used to, because it was the first thing, so that might have caused that to happen?
That's what I think would happen, because I know some people at first, they would stare at the first one, they'd be like, so what am I supposed to do here? And so that's probably what happened there. And then the second trial, they were more comfortable with it, and that's how they were able to do better. Yeah.
This is less of a question and more of a suggestion. I believe that, especially with your setup, if you actually presented your trials a lot faster in variable speed, you see a bigger difference between young and old.
Oh, okay.
The younger would do a lot better with the faster speed, like playing video games.
Yeah.
While older will start to struggle once it becomes faster.
Yeah. I did notice that younger participants did get kind of restless with the speed, but what can you do?
Yes, I have a question. I'm part of the older adult area. When you were doing the survey, who was willing to give you more of a help, more easy with you? The younger adults or the older adults were more patient, or did it make any difference at all?
There wasn't much of a difference. Students were willing to participate. They said, okay, fine, I'll do it. Older adults, some of them did ask more questions about it. They were saying, what is this about exactly? After getting the consent form, they read it over, and they're like, oh, okay. And they just did it. And they're like, yeah, we'd love to participate. Some cases, when I went to senior center, I just went up and gave a small speech to a room full of seniors. And some of them, they just came straight to me, like, okay, where do I go? And others had to bring other friends along with them.